specialize topic.
Yeah.
For you to be able to call and go back to your college and say, actually, this is a what you really need. I heard a lot today, I'm looking for a language teacher. Something that she's going to do, and then add something else to it. And teacher also, we didn't have these kids in our classes. Whether we know it or not, they are there. Well, this is set up. Opportunities myself, my name is Brenda myself. I'm from the University of Australia. I'm the Central. I probably say to those in special school or in schools that have incredibly high amount of children with special educational needs. My everyone being successful at school, but my either the niche areas or my specializations are SEN and the bilingualism. So for me, this kind of job in an international school was incredible. Being able to okay, start next one. I'm going to start with learning difficulties do not always result from problems within the student. The school's own policies and pedagogical practices have a significant impact on attainment. Yeah. You want to? Yeah. You feel comfortable? We have work.
So I can see that if it's a small school, then it's easier to adapt through the student needs, and find some extra help, find a teacher who can do that. Otherwise, if it's a big state school, we're not so much. But yeah, it does.
Anyone else want to add anything?
I missed the beginning part, I'm sorry, but the learning difficulties can always result from problems within the student schools and policies and pedagogical practices have a significant impact on them. So yes, whether we're setting up the student for success, but yeah.
One of my favorite phrases, setting people up for success. Okay, excellent. Let's go on to the next one. I just want to do some definitions for some of you. It might be like, of course we know this, but just clear as I'm using it. PAL is English as an additional language. There is no assumption of like level of competency or level of proficiency within that. That's just an English language learner. And special educational needs. We're talking about maybe physical, some sort of physical thing, where someone has some paralysis or something. Developmental, you're talking about something like ADHD, Down syndrome, autism, fragile, something that interferes with intellectual development. You've got behavioral and emotional. So this could be something like anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, conduct disorder, and then sensory, which could be like blindness, deafness, sensory processing disorder. Really messy categories. Things move. Up until about 2 years ago, we put ADHD here in behavioral, but now our research on so many things are changing so quickly. The way we think about things, we know it's more appropriate here that ADHD is more about the way that the brain develops and the brain works. So we've moved that over to developmental. Lots of other ways to categorize things, but there they are. Okay. Yes, please. Right. So EAL does not equal SEN. Yes. I see the EAL teachers doing this. There's so much confusion though. Okay. But They often get learning support, and I think it's a really compelling reason for the EAL department and the SEN department to work together. But that can also, the flip side of that is you can also have this sort of thing that develops at EAL is a form of SEN. Okay, and students with EAL needs may also have SEN. Now, how many of you work in international schools? Okay. Nothing more, but you're familiar with them. Now, we have no reason to think that there are any more children, EAL children, that have SEN than the general population. However, in international schools, we are likely to have a higher proportion. Anyone want to take a guess why? And EAL, we're likely to get more children with special educational needs in our school.
Generally, I think international schools have more individualized approach and more resources, so parents who are aware of the problems might opt for international schools.
100%, 100%. And we will often get children because particularly, you know, if you're coming from communities where there's a lot of shame around special educational needs, you won't be getting all the information from the parents. The parents may have been told the child needs to go into a special school, and instead they approach the international school, frame it in such a way that we don't really know what's going on, okay? And 2 years later, we discover once they trust us that this child has a diagnosis for this and that. And it's true in every international school I have ever worked in. Parents that can afford it will use it as an alternative to a special school or to what they would know would be a bad educational experience out in the state sector. So in international schools, we have to be even more aware of special educational needs. Okay, so next slide, please. This complicated web, because it is complicated. Some special needs are very difficult to identify because the student is not fluent in English. We're going to go. It's an EAL problem. Once they understand, once they get the language, all of that is going to go away. Okay? Does it go away? No. Okay. We don't really have the testing. A lot of the testing is very English orientated. Most assessment tools are not appropriate for EAL students. It cannot accurately measure their performance. They were normed against native speaking, or at least, you know, populations in Britain or populations in the United States. I'll give you an example of a lovely girl we've got in grade 12. Went for an assessment, an IQ assessment, they gave her 64. She did it in English. Home language is Russian. Okay, 64. Does anyone know 64 is pretty much like mental retardation, right? Yeah, it's very low. It's very low. I mean, in the UK, you would 100% be in a special school with that. Okay, she is doing the DP, and she is successful at it, and she's been to university. Does she have some developmental delay? Is she a 64? No. But when you test a Russian-speaking child in English on an IQ test that was normed against native-speaking children, he's going to come out as a 64. So you can't trust a lot of these assessments that we're getting. Okay? We also have children that are operating in 3 languages. Okay, English, Latvian, and Russian is a very common one, obviously, because of where we are. Okay, some children even 4. Throw in a Spanish mother or something. Okay. What's their home language? What language are they? Yeah, we're not sure. we're not sure, they're not sure, okay? You know, they're getting these assessments done, they're showing slow processing speed. I'm gonna have slow processing speed if I've got these like 3 dictionaries in my head. And every time I learn a word in English, I gotta run into the Latvian one, and about some of my Latvian words there. Then it's not my Latvian one, so I gotta go to my Russian one, and then I finally find it, and 30 seconds later, the teacher's moved on to the So multilingualism or bilingualism can actually create slower processing speed. Do we know as international educators and language educators that bilingualism or multilingualism is a great thing? Yes. Are there downsides to it? Okay. Question. What factors do you think affect academic achievement?
Language, is it like, yeah, so, okay.
Mm-hmm.
No, well, the child,
Behavior,
Behavior.
class dynamics, who you work with, how the work is organized, planning, for set criteria,
Exactly.
reflection.
Exactly. Okay, do you want to go to the next one? Yeah. So in general, I mean, everything is said or incorporated to the level of language proficiency. What do we mean by that? I've heard people talking about it. It's the BICS and it's the COUT. All right. It's the basic interpersonal communication skills, and it's the cognitive and academic language proficiency. This makes a huge difference. We're going to talk a lot more about it. That is our key to untangling this web. How supportive the learning environment is. What are the attitudes towards behavior and learning? Is the environment supportive? Do the students feel safe? Do they feel valued? Do they feel settled there? And stuff. Okay. Do they have teachers that understand the development of language? Right? And do they have teachers that need to provide additional support for all of their pupils who are developing language proficiency? Okay. And the fourth one at the end. And why is it way down there? Because in many cases, that is your absolute smallest impact on whether a child is successful, a student is successful in a learning environment or not. Okay. So what are we going to do if we have concerns about the student? Okay. We're going to look at what's the progress in acquiring English. We're going to look at what's the progress in learning the curriculum. We're going to also say, is there behavior that's suggestive of additional needs? And the amazing is, why my job can be quite fun, you must be a detective, because this is not an easy, it is not an easy thing to unpick. And there are really, I had a meeting yesterday with a mother, and what I wanted to say is, I stay awake at night thinking about your son. I don't know what it is. Problem is, he came to school at 7 and he never even been to kindergarten, and he never knew anything how to sit down. Is the problem that English is his third language and he's only been here for 8 months? Or is the problem something else? But I still don't know. So there isn't an easy answer, but this will help us to start unpicking it. Okay. So, the number one thing that you or your teachers or your staff need to understand when you're unpicking, is it SEN or EAL, is what is the development of EAL? And you would be surprised, or maybe not surprised, how many teachers don't know this on a level that is useful to inform their pedagogical practice in the classroom. They can tell it to you, but they haven't internalized it. It was very interesting to hear I think Danielle speak, but he didn't speak for a month. Okay, and some people are like, oh, that's horrible. And I was kind of like, well, it could have been easy, but I know there is a silent period, even for older students that come in. It can be 2 weeks, it can be 6 months. Normally, let's not get concerned about it. Normally not a cause for concern, and it's not a cause for stage. So kids are sitting and taking in so much. I know you work with your little ones, and so many of the EYFS, the early year teachers have said to me, please wait, they'll be chatting when they come back after the October break. And then student audit, and then they chat. And if they're not talking, if they're not talking, then we call you Brenna. That is the way to go. Okay, so do teachers understand it? I know all of you in your own way are language learners. Have you ever just been in your second or your third language and just gone, oh, just leave me alone? At the end of the day, you come home and if I have to hear another word, all right, and like for me, I used to live in Russia and work in Russia. And I walk in the door and someone starts speaking to me in Russian. There. Our kids are going through the same thing. We have girls that came to us at my school, and at break times and lunchtime, she was going as far away, typically as far away as she could out on the playground. And there was a lot of concern about it. And I went and talked to her. What do you think?
Leave me alone.
I'm just here. For a little bit. Hear English. No offense, miss, but go away. Is she fine now? Yeah, she's fine. All right. So this is a normal stage. How do we support children through it? I've often thought the trauma of, like, especially our youngest ones, coming in and operating in English all day must be immense. And I've always thought this would be like a major work for school counselors.
You have 5 minutes. Make sure.
Only 5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, my apologies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So. Normal bit. Right. Next one. Okay. So then how does it develop? Right. Remember, we have just internalized it. We have to live and breathe it. You get your basic interpersonal communication skills or your big, approximately 2 years. It's the language of everyday living. It's cognitively undemanded, so it doesn't always feel like that. Okay, it's content embedded. All right, it's kind of easy. I'm like, do you want a glass of water? And you've got it there. It's not abstract. It's not an abstract, like, intellectual concept. Okay. We often tell parents a dream. And this dream is that their child comes in to school or to our bilingual nursery. And I don't know what we do. We throw language all over them. And magically, they develop language. Often they become very fluid in the, as you call it, playground language very quickly. Okay. So we overestimate their language proficiency. That's coupled with a lot of kids speak relatively accent-free. We heard today, all right, from our first speaker about the accent and how important the accents are. If you've got someone speaking to you accent-free, what do you automatically assume? They're completely fluid. Okay? They can function as well. Low stress environment in the classroom, it's singing songs, something. So lots of cognitive energy into just functioning in English. How is we say, how was your weekend? We get a fluid answer back from them. People have frequency vocabulary. Sometimes they have significant history. How did you miss the word close? Or something in your like, how did this happen? All right. They're recycling sentences and chunks of language. They're literally just plugging in languages. Okay? In class, they can copy down stuff. They can match things. They can probably make objects. But producing language is still taking up a large chunk of their cognitive energy. Okay? Next one. Okay, now we've got these kids that appear fluent, and I have to say, and when I say I'm meaning like people of international schools. Okay, we're really bad about hiring people from Britain and America. We kind of just bring them in and we kind of assume that they're going to be great at speaking to the greatest teaching there, but they're missing this whole bit about the language proficiency. Okay, so this is a huge danger. Okay, the cognitive academic language proficiency does not develop for 5 to 7 years. And here's something that blew my mind, the 7 to 10. If a child starts studying in English or any other language before they have formal schooling in their own language, it really takes longer. It takes 7 to 10 years. All right. So the ideal time, we shouldn't say this because schools are kindergarten, okay? The ideal time is school, okay? But it's actually going to take them longer. And these are the kids that are going to appear the most fluent, okay? They don't have, or this is how long it takes, the language needed to understand and discuss the content of the curriculum. It's cognitively demanding, it's context reduced, and at times it's even abstract. All right? And we're using it for things like summarizing, hypothesizing, classifying. These are normal classroom. Okay? But look at the time. Okay? So what do you need to do? You need to start, if you're trying to unpick this web of SEN, you need to start with a language proficiency assessment. Be aware, as I'm sure you all are, these profiles can be super spicy. You can have someone who's speaking and listening is really low, but their reading and writing is high. You're not going to expect that it's going to be sort of, equal across it depending on their circumstance. Next one, please. All right. And any assessment, sorry, there is a word missing. I realize that. Of pupils' English or any other assessment within the first 1 to 7 years, it may really underestimate their actual potential and their actual abilities. Okay, right. So, how do we unpick this? All right, we need to consider how long the child has been studying English. Next one. Okay, I'm going to use an example with WIDA. WIDA is a test that's used a lot in the United States to determine language proficiency for non-native English speaking students. There are 6 levels to it. I don't think it's the best. I just think it's a tool. You may have your own tool, okay? But it goes from entering to reaching, okay? Reaching is when you're able to compete with a native speaker, okay? Academically, I mean, not just something, football or something academically. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so this is just an example. It's like quite small, but this is just an example to show you. This is speaking and listening for grade level 6 to 8. And you can see at entering, they're following 1-step oral commands. I'll just go through the first one. Beginning, follow multi-step oral commands and instructions. Developing, categorize context-based examples from oral directions. Level 4, identify main ideas and the details of oral discourse. And level 6, use information to accomplish grade level tasks. Okay, so it's not till you're all the way down here, all right, that you're reaching, all right, that you're actually competing with level playing field with native speakers. Okay, next one. So how do I sort out whether someone's on track in EAL or not? And so this is WIDA. If you're using other assessments, all right, the first thing you need to find out is how many years does it take to reach each level for their age? Okay, So the blue one is the standard trajectory, all right? So here are my reader levels. Remember, 6 is the one we want to get to. Here is the standard trajectory. Here's the trajectory of the kids that went into kindergarten or into preschool before they learned in their own language. It's going like this, right? And we also have accelerated older learners because sometimes we get older learners that with the right input can move through all these stages in 3 or 4 years. We're talking like older teenagers, okay? So this is what normal progress looks like. Look at this though, look at how long it takes to get from here, which is your bit, up into where you're starting to get into your health. Okay, that's almost 3 years to get up even into that area. Okay, next one. So take a look at this one. Here's Patrick. Patrick is in the green. Should I be concerned about Patrick? You know, he's keeping up, isn't he? I mean, he's slow. It's just keeping in up Patrick because Patrick's just Patrick thing. We don't know what Patrick's. You know. But you know, he's keeping up. This isn't increasing. I think of some things that maybe teachers, you know, doing differently in the class or something. But in general, I want to not about this, not about something else about this. Now let's look at the next one, which is Sasha. Sasha's been with us for 3 years. Should I be concerned?
Yes.
Yeah. I should be very concerned. I don't know, like those of you, you know, that worked in other international schools, you know, you're going to something, you're like, this is Sasha, and she has been in PL for the past 6 years. And you're like, there's something else going on here. I'm pretty sure. Like, when you're here, our teaching is like, let's make a decision with that. Yeah.
And that's a good one because we feel like we're failing as teachers sometimes when the child doesn't get appropriate support that they actually need.
Okay, next one. Okay, so the first question, if I see Sasha, someone like Sasha, is you know, is the student getting the appropriate EAL support? Don't just mean you got it, okay? I don't want to say don't just mean you EAL support. Because remember, the teacher is language teacher. Okay, now we know and we've seen this and we might feel it, but sometimes we haven't like articulated and said it. There's a tendency for students to make initial rapid progress. They just go through that bit.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're out on the playground, having a great time, and they're, you know, they're around and they're free and all of that. So misleading. But what happens? He isn't EAL support anymore. Okay, he just discussed, I don't know, the flash grouping or something like that. And he's great. He doesn't need it. Get him out of it. Get him out of EAL, you know, get him into this language. Something. Okay. Each year, though, the schoolwork becomes cognitively complex and demanding. The students' achievement levels start to fall. And when you look then, you get to grade 12 or grade 11, that promising kid is now significantly behind. Yeah. That's why, like the first one, Patrick, you know, he's keeping up at his own little bit below, okay? But someone like Sasha, that could be the start of something like this, where it's gonna go down, down. There's a whole body of research in kids in international schools, so worldwide. So we need to give up, but they just couldn't stall out. They're just not reaching their potential, okay? I think this is probably a huge portion of it. Okay, next one. Okay. Question is, are teachers structuring learning to a level that is appropriate to the student's level of language competence? Okay, and again, they're misled. Okay? Kids are given tasks and activities that in their altered or are too cognitively demanding for them because they're putting all their time into their language production. Kids can be using language that's just too complex. They're using metaphors, they're using similes, they're using Anglo-cultural references, okay? And the kid is just like, I do not get this. So going back, the number one thing you can do is make sure that your colleagues feel that language progression, that they're not just going to know about that, that they're actually so aware that it is there and where the kid is on it. Okay, so now we've done this language assessment, we've tracked them, we're still concerned. We can go back to Patrick or to Sasha, okay? The way I do it is to filter questions, all right, to identify whether it's at the end. Remember, this is all about being the detective. There is absolutely no easy answer here, okay? So if the kid is getting proper EAL support and the teachers are adapting their learning to the needs of the student, we need to look at filter questions. Okay, so these barriers to learning, there's a lot more, but these are the main ones, which are lack of response, difficulties with listening, lack of oral expression, processing difficulties, slow progress in reading, difficulties in writing, physical and sensory difficulties, and social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. Now, these filter questions and this categorization is based on common process that we have in the UK. I've taken what different educational authorities have done and kind of put them together in a way that I feel works for children in international schools and works for children who have English as an additional language. Slightly different than the UK context, because remember, those kids are going to be there in England. They might be speaking a different language at home, but they're also in an English speaking environment 24 hours a day, or at least when they're out. Okay, so the two I want to look at, the two I just want to look at as sample are lack of response and social, emotional, mental health. This is one that we don't often associate with language. Okay, next one. So how do I do this then? Filter questions. I have questions that we ask when I sit down with the teacher or other people that are involved, the EAL teachers. And first one, has the student had less than 6 months English? Okay, number one question, right? Does the pupil respond to nonverbal communication? Maybe they're not answering you, but they're going to see, or you're getting some sort of interaction from them. Is the language used to communicate with the student appropriate to the student's level of language development? Or is it from exactly what the child is hearing, and they're not even aware that I'm talking to you right there, you know? Okay, really important, don't assume. Have hearing difficulties been ruled out? Super important one. Does the student interact appropriately with peers? Okay, so is this a language issue, or is this maybe something like autism or something else where that interaction isn't there? And does the student respond appropriately in their home language? Giving information. Okay, so if the majority is yes, I would say they need a home language assessment plus more planned opportunities in a safe environment to speak in English to develop their response. If it's majority no, you need to send them for an assessment, preferably in a home language or their home language, and it needs to be explored further. Or if you have a person like me within your school, for me to do some pre-assessments, what I can do sort of within the scope to then point the parents out there. All right, next one. All right. Also with these filter questions, because as we know, as educators, we can't wait to get the assessment out. 6 months. It might take longer, and we're still gonna have that kid sitting in our class, and we're still gonna have to get on with it, okay? Strategies to support, right? Do staff have awareness of language development? Always gonna be my number one, all right? Are you giving students time to think? Are you managing rush responses? Huge one. Remember, we're saying like, here's my English word paintbrush, and I put it in my Latvian, and I put it in my Russian, and then eventually I go, I got it. That can take time. You said 20, that's great. Go for 20. I said 12 opportunities, but like, and more opportunities are the better. Are they hearing it? Are they saying it? Are they using it? Are you allowing them to give nonverbal drawing gestures? All right, or short responses to show understanding, or even as we spoke with Ksenia, showed us showing and understanding in their home language. And I'm definitely going to add that in. I did add it in, sorry. Have you used scaffolding techniques? Have you got the visuals in place to add anything? Are you using gestures? Are you speaking at a slower speed? Okay. Right. Next one. Now, if I have a child that has social emotional difficulties, and as I said, I chose this one because it's not one that we often associate. We kind of think difficulties, in the classroom. But when we get a child that's sitting over tables or something like that, we don't necessarily go to language. Okay, so is the student experiencing confusion with a new culture and or a new school system? Or you take a child out of a system where they got 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 from the teachers, all right, and everything was teacher centered. And as we heard, like Daniel speaking, it was all about sort of, the focus is on the teacher, not on the learner. We put them in and we go, and you're small group students, you're just topic of inquiry. You're using this inquiry, and you're going to go off and do this. And the kid just lost. All right, how we've done a proper induction into our way of learning within our system. Okay. Really important. How much experience has the student had with formal education? This is more with your little ones, okay? You may have kids coming to you, even up to the age of 7 or 8, that have not had education. Also, just related to world events, we have kids that have been out of school for over maybe a year because they've been here, there, and everywhere, and they might not have consistently had that. Coupled with COVID, imagine you're 8 years old, all right, your whole school experience is disrupted. If you were lucky, you got 7, 8 glorious months of studying, okay? Significant stress or trauma related to recent experiences. Again, this is a big one right now. We are getting, it's slowed down a bit, but that both Russians and Ukrainians. Okay? So it's February 24th, and everyone's on a plane out. And the kids are literally sitting for 3 or 4 or 5 months in a hotel room or in an Airbnb or someplace in another country while parents are trying to sort out their life. And if they're lucky, they're getting a little bit of schooling or a little bit of socialization. But mostly they're on Netflix. Okay? This is a trauma. Maybe not in the sense of the word, but we have a lot of kids that have been through that, or they've been in this country, that country, over there, and somehow they've ended up here. Okay, have you had family separation or bereavement? Has there been bullying or racism that might be responsible? Is the student's lack of English proficiency causing frustration and preventing self-expression? Okay, they cannot express themselves. They don't have access anywhere to process their emotions. Okay, and is the student displaying challenging behavior due to the lack of language for oral expression? So task avoidance. So you time, it's task time. They're like, I gotta go to the toilet. or they'll do anything not to have to do the task. It's better to tip over the chair and sit on the table or pinch the girl next to you than actually to go, know what I'm doing. Okay, so again, with this majority yes, further SEMA support. If you've got a school counselor, okay, if it's no, all right, if you're going to work in right, then this could be something else. This could be ADHD, this could be autism, and the child needs to have some assessment outside of school. Unless your school is blessed to have its own psychologist or its own speech, speech and language therapist. Okay, so okay, so the strategies to support again. All right. Are we using visuals, timetables, planners to help the child understand what is expected? Are we breaking our instructions down into small steps? Do you remember when we saw with the Ouija? Multi-steps in instructions, like way down there. All right. Is there a consistent approach to all staff? One thing I think as teachers is we've really underestimated how much kids take contextual clues. So if I've got a teacher that allows me to walk in and sit with my feet up and chew gum and not pay attention to me on my phone, it's very confusing when I go down the corridor to science class and I walk in, sit down, no gum allowed, okay? Kids are taking massive context clues. If you haven't got the consistency, you're not doing them any favors, okay? So the teacher that just has no rules because, all the kids love me, I don't need anything, all right? Actually, not only are they making things difficult for their colleagues, but they're causing more emotional stress within kids, okay? And we support social skills and friendship development. Some children need extra help with developing friendships. Can we come up with deliberate, intentional ways of helping them to make friends? Something like community circle time, break time, lunchtime, times of incredible stress for children with SEN. Okay? Can we have some organized activities? All right, buddy system. Have you got a school policy on bullying? Are you following it? Are we giving them methods? They know they can show us what they learn. Clues, increase their access to the curriculum, repetition, key concepts, and vocabulary. Okay. And the number one thing, the phrase you said is, are we setting them up for success? Because if we're not, you get the pivot over all the tables and squares that you on the way out the door. Okay.
Thank you so much for the session. It was really, really informative and lots about it. My question is regarding setting high achievement for all and high expectations for everyone, and how does it apply for 10 students? Are you supporting new learning plans, or are you more towards keeping sensitive to the mainstream classes and just offering within support? How does that?
I think for me, ideally, most children, again, if you can get to international schools, which are different than state schools, okay? Totally different ballgame. My personal opinion is that international schools should be accepting children that have to have a curriculum that's so differentiated that they can't be within the norm. Okay? I know there are reasons why, like this family from NATO has 6 children. I know there are other reasons why, but in general, because we're not set up for it unless they're going to go and actually get an actual teacher to teach them that child. Okay, I think I'm a firm believer in what's called universal design, and that my classroom should be able to by everyone in it. Okay, and I might need help from my colleagues, my EAL colleagues, or might need help from a person like me how to do that, but that's what should be happening there. Push in, I'm never gonna push in. That's successful once you get about grade 3 or 4. And then the last thing they want is the SEN teachers sitting next to them, and I think you have to find a different way. And a different way could be that you just happen to be in the class and the teacher says, oh, Miss Carter, you put this through here, and school mom needs to be like that group. Because you have to be creative. But I don't think that pushing in isn't just, it's not possible all the time. You've got to go back to universal design. But you also have to ask hard questions when you're doing your admission. What do I have to change for this child? And yes, we are going to change things, but when you get to the point where the child can't follow the core curriculum, then I think you need something else. You're not going to be able to include them in the mainstream. So I know it's a wishy-washy answer, but
you also mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that there is certainly stigma within this culture that parents do not want to get an official diagnosis, and they go to international school when they try all the other options and they try not to reveal the situation completely. So it might be that she's becoming aware of this particular situation like after half a year.
And then I think you have to ask yourself, like, and don't get me wrong, because I've seen kids like that are nonverbal when they're like this big, and they're saying, you're high school, and they've got everything. So I think, there's no hard and fast answer, but I think you have to be prepared. What is your exit point? And I do think that IB schools, they're a bit, I don't know if schizophrenic is the right word, but we're inclusive, oh my God. Okay, that's good. I don't know if you need to be open and honest, like what it is, like, can you offer an alternative to that? Like, we have kids that are doing our own high school diploma that we've adapted to them. But I think you have to think ahead as to what it looks like, but you just don't know. Like I said, I've seen kids that were like smearing stuff over the wall, just rolling on the floor, and then they're with honors graduating. Like, kids develop at different times, and with the right support, that's why it's complicated. Okay.
And then I guess going on from that is educating the parents of this culture that we can tackle this situation.
Yeah.
We need you to support us
And
in
it's hard.
our journey.
And I know, like, my frustration, sometimes parents will go around and get the diagnosis that they want.
That they're paid for.
And so they paid for. And there is, I lived in Russia for a long time. Like, I have just like memory of anything but autistic diagnosis. Yeah. There's certain things they will say that it's anything but. Right? So you're not always going to get the diagnosis. And I think that's really frustrating. And you're not always going to get the parent on board. But a diagnosis is a starting point. And if we know, if that child is autistic and we know that child's autistic, even if they have a diagnosis that says it might look like autism, but actually they're a genius.
Yeah.
Something like that, we have to put those things in place in the classroom. And I do think also that you can't keep sending people out for the diagnosis to get the diagnosis you want. Like, I've had to deal with it. Yeah, I mean, there's universal accommodations and things that we use for particular, for like ADHD or something. You don't need a diagnosis to be putting those in place, those support structures in place, if that's what works with the child. Because it is frustrating. But I mean, even in the UK,
but it's also educating the teachers, because as a teacher, I also know that I don't have all the strategies that I like. Oh, how should I deal with this student? I tried this, and this. Please help me. What else could I do?
Yeah, and I think a good STEM teacher. I mean, I think I just come back from, it was in Athens, it was actually really good. It was a STEM conference for Senko, an international school in Europe. And one of the things we were discussing is like, normally, like we look at things like tier 3 are the ones that get intensive support. Tier 2 is sort of like, you know, an additional like small group work and things, but tier 1 is more universal. And how important it is in our job to have enough time for tier 1, mainly for working with our colleagues and educating our colleagues. The one thing that I always do is like every year I want, what is autism? What is dyslexia?
Yeah.
What is dyscalculia? What is dysgraphia? You know, I run sessions and I keep an open dialogue and I periodically send out email choice. Hey, look at this article or look at that and having that talk. And in an international environment, you can't assume that that's ever going to get embedded. You've got to keep it up because people are here for 2 or 3 years. It's
Yep.
great if they stay on longer, but that's the reality of international school teachers. So it's really important that that goes to the forefront and that you just don't assume in the way you might in a school like in England or something where you can embed it way longer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, if people want, I have the other social questions, just email me. Do you want to put my, I mean, I'm on here.
The email.
I have yeah, the last one.
Yep.
Yeah, just email me, okay, please send me and I will send them to you.
Yeah. just give me a second. Yeah, well,
Oh,
yeah, take your-
yeah.
Okay, let's-
There we go.
Here we go.
Woo!
Something sweet.
It's sweet.
So is it a framework that you're using or you developed the?
So, it's a common framework, it's like a synthesis of what, sort of common practice within the UK that we've used. I mean, like, I think it was probably like 15, 20 years ago, like the early 2000s, that we had a really big push at looking, because we had lots more, especially we had a lot more like Polish people from the Baltic states, a lot more EAL than we haven't had because, you know, these countries joined the European Union, and like, how do we, we were in the European Union and the transponder, but, you know, how do we bring these people in? And so they were developed out of that. So what I've done is just taken like a synthesis of the ones that I find are the most helpful, because not all of them are helpful because you're not talking necessarily about people in an English speaking environment all the time, and adapted them to what I see. So like they're partially mine, but I must give credit to numerous advisors and numerous LEAs and setting up the framework.